Okay, I'm just rounding up my panelists. So thanks everyone for being here, I guess this morning, afternoon, depending upon what time zone you're in. And I'm going to try to make a couple of provocative statements. Hopefully I won't offend anyone. But I think it's important that we do have different points of view represented. So myself, I'm Cliff Grossner. And for about 7 months now, I run the market intelligence function at the Open Compute Project Foundation. And part of the function that I run is to come here to events like these to help ensure that people have an understanding of who we are and look to grow the community that understands us and interacts with the Open Compute Project. And it is true that the project was started by Facebook 10 years ago, but quite a number of years ago we achieved liftoff in the sense that we're now 300 members, and yes, Facebook is still an important member and an important contributor, but is not, the membership itself lives on beyond Facebook's launching of the project. And yes, also the initial focus for the Open Compute Project Foundation was data center operators at very large scale, and that's still a very important part of what we do. However, in the last number of years, the community has grown to include other constituencies. So you might think about the Open Compute Project Foundation as having several overarching constituencies. One is the hyperscale adopters, always important, and drive a tremendous amount of innovation, and their ecosystem of vendors that supply them. And very often, those vendors do not supply anyone else. They just build for the hyperscalers, which is fine. That's a very important ecosystem, and we nurture it. But then we have another ecosystem within the Open Compute Project. That is the ecosystem that is the traditional IT vendors that service outside of hyperscalers to tier 2 cloud operators, the telecom operators, and the enterprise. And the way that we work is the innovations that are being driven by the operators at scale around automation, efficient equipment, are captured in specs, and those specs are then used by the IT ecosystem vendors, the silicon providers such as Intel and AMD and ARM and others, or the device providers, could be HPE, could be Mytech, or Nokia, which has been instrumental in the definition of the Open Edge server, which is an Open Compute project, based on Open Compute project innovations. And then other elements of the ecosystem like system integrators. And what I wanted to do today in organizing this panel was to bring together a number of people that could talk about what are the opportunities for the innovations that are hyperscale led to find their way into non-hyperscale environments, and what can we learn from the hyperscale environments and take that forward. And so with that, there's just one or two more facts. I mentioned 300 odd members in the Open Compute Project today. I should also mention that we have over 5,000 engineers that are active in our projects and our mailing lists, and that if you at some point want to find out more about the projects that are going on and tap into the hyperscale innovation, you can contact me. You can go to our website, click on the projects tab, and they're all listed there. And you're able to join any one of those projects. You don't have to be a member, and it doesn't cost you anything to find out what's going on. And so in terms of the panel today, I would like to introduce the panel, but I'm going to offer for the panel members to introduce themselves, as they know themselves way better than I can do that. So why don't we start over here with Nurit, who is well known here at Layer123.
Okay, can you hear me? Thank you, Cliff. So my name is Nurit Sprecher. I'm working for Nokia, heading the Nokia strategy and activities in the standardization activities in the context of cloudification and virtualization, management and automation, and application enablement, including network monetization and opening the edge for innovation. And I'm also was the founding chair of ETSI, the multi-access edge computing. At the beginning it was mobile edge computing. And I'm now serving as the vice chair of the ETSI ZSM, the Zero Touch Network and Service Management Group.
Hi, I'm Ron Porter from Amdocs. I'm heading product marketing for Amdocs network and OSS products, as well as the wider Amdocs 5G story, which spans from business down to network.
And I'm Marc Cohn. I'm from Spirent, a testing technology company, but I also have additional hats in, I actually serve as Spirent's primary member within MEF in the Test and Certification Committee, and I also lead a project for SD-WAN certification. And just a couple other words on my background. I've been involved in the open networking community from very early. I went to ETSI NFE Industry Group meeting #1, and I was also involved at the very first meetings of the Open Networking Foundation, which launched SDN. So it's really amazing to see in 10 years' time how far we've really come. I mean, given that it's a and another thing, I worked for Nokia and Amdocs before. So I've worked for a few companies.
Well, and the good thing is we're all still standing and here doing good work. And so let's kick it off. I wanted, and just to remind everyone, we have about 15 minutes reserved for audience questions at the end. So just keep in mind as you hear things, be ready to step up and ask a couple of questions. We'll be very happy to have you do that. And so for the first prepared question, I wanted to take it maybe a little easy and ask the question about edge to cloud, right? We all use that term, but I don't think anyone has a consistent perspective on what that is. And I think from my notes here, it may have been Nurit that was going to kick that one off. So from your perspective, maybe your Nokia hat, maybe your ETSI hat, what does that mean?
Yeah, so let's talk about the edge cloud. And the edge cloud offers cloud computing capabilities in an IT service environment in a very lucrative point to the network, right? Something that was never open to the ecosystem or to the web scalers, and this is the edge of the network. And this network is characterized by proximity, by low latency, by ultra low latency and high bandwidth. And we can actually leverage the IT economy of scales to allow proximity, to allow context, agility, and speed to really create new revenues and new value in the network. And if you think about what can happen, application and services can be accelerated by increased responsiveness and maximized interactivity from the edge of the network. Robust low latency can be ensured for critical communication. Popular and locally relevant content can be delivered exactly from the point of where the users are connected. Real-time analytics can be performed at the point of capture, and corrective actions can be taken immediately. And all of this based on observed data. We talked about data services that can be taken locally. And also, if you take to that and think about also access to the network information, context information, service analytics, all of this can be used, first of all, to optimize the network and customize it to support particular use cases. So this is one thing. For example, if you think about what is happening today in Oran Alliance, Oran Alliance is actually opening the network, opening the RAN for innovation such that we can have an application, intelligent applications that will understand the use cases top-down from the enterprise scenario and understand the network data in abstract level that is getting from the RIC or non-RIC, near-RIC, it doesn't matter. And then it can actually have some intelligence and help to customize the RAN to support this use case. But it's not only that. We actually take that information and further abstract it in order to help to optimize the application itself. And here we open up extreme opportunities towards the enterprises that we can help them to increase and optimize their processes, their applications, their performance, their experience, etc., without even understanding how the network operates. So it's the level of abstraction that matters here. And all of this is really enabled by opening the edge to that. So if you think about, just to highlight, if you think about the edge cloud, in my opinion, this is something that I would like to say, like this is the cloud for the real-time and personalized services, which provide unparalleled experience with reduced latency, and we can also combine it with highly efficient network operation and service delivery, and it's enable a myriad of use cases across multiple sectors and multiple industries, including, of course, the consumers themselves.
Thank you, Nurit.
Long answer to quick.
No, that's good. We need to kick it off with someone that has something to say. And you knew that we were going to come to you first, so you were prepared. I appreciate that. I wonder if Marc or Ron would like to add anything to that at all. You're very welcome to.
Oh, I thought that Nurit gave a very comprehensive description of what we can expect for the edge cloud. The couple points that come to mind for me are there's still this discussion about where is the edge. That's one thing that I don't think there's a complete unanimous perspective on. And the second one is that the edge cloud brings tremendous opportunity. I completely agree. There's applications that we couldn't even think about before, and especially coupled with the global 5G rollout that's going to take a few years before standalone really becomes real. But on the other hand, there's tremendous complexity we're going to have to manage now that we're going to be extending the cloud from in this hybrid environment where it's now there are going to be a number of network functions or at least capabilities that are going to be needed in order to manage this cloud and manage it in a different way at a much higher level than what we're thinking about. Just an example would be when we look at some of these new applications that are latency sensitive or maybe they're media sensitive, well, we look at network monitoring, we look at some cloud monitoring, we don't look at experience monitoring, and what does that really mean in a quantified way? I mean, it's a very different way of thinking about it, and we're going to have to start looking at extending the paradigms we have for management to be able to address the telco cloud in general, but then with the complexity level, the edge cloud.
And actually, I'm so happy you said management, because one of the important activities going on within the Open Compute project is how to manage equipment, any kind, network, server, storage, over a highly distributed geographic environment where we kind of view it as it's no longer cloud versus edge. It's just one ecosystem of workloads collaborating together in a highly distributed mode that needs to be managed. And that's how you're going to realize the use case. Ron? Yeah, sorry.
So just to emphasize, I think some of the stuff that was said, I think the value of edge was realized quite a while back. I even heard somebody, when 5G was still maturing, somebody said I don't remember who it was exactly, 5G needs edge more than edge needs 5G, because a lot of the benefits we're seeing today in many POCs, the benefits come in the form of edge, and many of the private network offerings and opportunities we're seeing today leverage the fact that you get the private network, you have the edge on the premise, you can do a lot of stuff locally and get the benefits that Nurit mentioned before, if it's the latency and hosting locally and maybe data privacy, things like that. But then just like Marc mentioned, now that the edge becomes not one edge but a hierarchy of edges, it adds this complexity, because then you need to start making decisions. Where do I put what? And where do I put what might be the application itself, the video analytics application. Do I want to put it somewhere too close, or maybe at the city level or the country level, etc.? But it also goes all the way back to the 5G core, right? Because now that the 5G core is cloud native, and maybe I want to start putting network functions, UPF is always the classic example. I want to have it at the edge to enable this local processing of the traffic. So all of this complexity now is starting to be really explored and materialized. We've been talking about dynamic network function placement for a few years, and now we're happy to see, like was mentioned yesterday by our friends from Hyperblocks and A1, where we're actually doing this POC of putting different network functions from the core in the public cloud or in the edge or in this hybrid environment. Again, completely driven by the service requirement or by the intent, which is the the term that we
And,
use.
and if I could just one more word, and private networking just makes it, I mean, if we can solve some of these problems, it just opens up the whole private networking space.
Yeah, Nurit, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted, first of all, I think, Mark, you, and both of you, of course, you added a very important comment about where is the edge. So, and you actually mentioned hierarchy of edge distribution. So this is absolutely correct, and this really put a lot of implications on the management, efficient management, but we need also to remember more than that. If you think about the cloud run, that I want to put not the core functions at the edge, which is easier, but we want to put the run functions at the edge, this becomes more complicated from configuration and from operational point of view, because then the server configuration really depends on the workload demand. And if you think about the run-specific processing requirements and needs, you think about, for example, the EDU, the virtual DU, for example, and it has higher processing demand and the very strict requirement on latency, right? And to handle all this, manage all this pipeline, this is very, very tricky, and you need to use accelerators, and you need to support multiple accelerators and without tailoring. So this is really something that is becoming more and more challenging. Of course, solvable, but the industry needs to combine efforts in order to provide good solutions for that. And OCP can play a great role here, by the way. And the other thing that I want to mention, that it's not only operational, it's also security. When you get to the edge, you open up, you need to be very, especially if you want to open up to the enterprise environment, security, having native security built in, this is very critical for the success of the edge.
So I think we should drop on to our next question, but we almost started to touch on it when we started to talk about the complexity of management, which is a good transition. And the question really was, what are the top automation technology challenges that need to be solved? And so in addition to management, we start to talk a little bit security, and then I start to think, when I think of security, the first thing I think about is the box, the device, right? Is there some hardware root of trust built in to the device? Is there something that can be attached to the firmware so that when we're doing a firmware upgrade thousands of miles away, or someone's trying to do one and shouldn't be doing one, can we catch it? So what are the other technology elements that we really need to be thinking about? I think, Ron, you were going to kick this one off for us.
Yeah, I think this very much connects to the discussion also we had on the last couple of days, starting from multi-domain service orchestration and into the fact of end-to-end service orchestration. And if, you know, we were thinking of it more as RAN, transport, core, that's the digital thing, and then we start, all right, we have services extending to the cloud, adds complexity, and now we add this edge, which, like we just mentioned, can be in different places. Once again, this adds to the complexity, and when I have different services with different requirements, how do I decide how to do this orchestration? And another thing to keep in mind is, right, we mentioned edge, and again, it can be a private edge from the service provider or any one of the edge extensions from the hyperscalers are now pushing out. But the thing to remember, when we're now starting to talk about edges, it's not like we're used to the public cloud, do anything. You want to scale up to, I don't know how many virtual machines, you have it. The edge is a finite resource, right? So it might be bigger, once again, depending where you're talking about. But if we're talking about a street cabinet as one type of edge, it has a limited amount of resources. So once again, it brings the importance of real-time visibility and understanding of what are my resources, what can I leverage, again, both from down to the hardware level, virtual machine level, and up to the application levels, because the applications are now going to be dynamic. The radio functions are going to be dynamic. All this dynamicity adds huge complexity and emphasizes the need for this real-time visibility and responsiveness to enable to address these services in real time according to the requirement. And just I think the other angle, because we talked about the operational complexity, but we have, we're not here for charity, right? So the business requirements have to be considered here all the time, and this adds another layer of complexity because it's not just I make the decision just to optimize my operations and saves money, which is very important, but I'm going to have to start making the business considerations and how that affects these operational complexities I mentioned before.
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you talked about the hardware just a little bit, because many people may not trigger on the fact that in some of the research work that I've done, I would share with you that respondents shared with us that more than 50% of the workloads that they're looking to deploy at the edge will require some sort of hardware acceleration. So if we're still thinking on the model that, you know, all GPUs or the majority of GPUs are going to be in a data center used for training and there's going to be very little accelerated compute in the edge, that's really not a right way to be thinking about it. There's going to be some very intensive workloads that are going to be at edge locations, and those are going to need to be managed and potentially look for some standardization along those modules, in addition to what people are referring to as SmartNIC cards today. So I'm not sure if Ron or Nurit, you wanted to add something more about the challenges here?
I want to add a challenge, and that is if we look at automation, just fundamental automation, and we look at relying on automation, the way the cloud operators look at it, and moving that into the telecommunications domain, where operations is going to be inherently suspect of automated mitigation, automated actions. That is not necessary. That's a foregone conclusion in the web, in the cloud, the public cloud community at least, and even those who are going down a more hybrid cloud route. But in the telecommunications domain, it is not to me, that's a huge challenge. It's again a part of that whole set of cultural challenges in migrating to a telco cloud that we talked about yesterday. But this is something I think needs we really need to think a lot about, because there seems to be a blanket perspective in the industry that, oh, well, AI, ML is the answer to all problems. Well, I don't believe that we're there yet. I think that there has to be a new ancillary field that's going to look at some of these cultural implications and how they're applied to technology, and then to be able to adopt those in a systematic way, so that we don't just give up the keys to an automated system that we don't really understand what the behavior is going to be.
Yeah, exactly. Can I add into that? Yeah. So you talked about understanding what resources we have, etc. Actually, it's much more than resources. It's also what are the platform services that I have. If I want to run analytic, do I have enough support for? Of course, resources, computing resources is so much important, in the memory, etc., and storage. But also, what services the platform provide me that I can utilize in order to run my application better. So it's getting much more complicated. But I want to say that when we talk about the operation, we need to think about the end-to-end. It's not the edge is just distribution of functions, and even talking any longer about the run and core, in my opinion, it's not relevant any longer, right? We have functions and we have microservices, and we distribute them as we need, and we place them as we need. And if we think about 5G, we think about beyond 5G. In fact, they are expected to provide, if you think about the original thinking, it's a virtualized unlimited gigabit and ultra-reliable connection to people and objects where matters, right? And each of these services actually have extremely demanding requirements in terms of latency, throughput, reliability, coverage, security, cost targets, etc. And now building a network that supports all this broad array of new services that can be set up, scaled, torn down in a moment notice, this really presents a lot of challenges. And you think about the virtualization environment, you think about the programmability environment, and all the use cases, and you think, okay, I need now to operate, I need distributed clouds, okay, in different clouds. It can be hybrid clouds, right? I have heterogeneous networks. I need to support multiple technologies, multiple access technologies. I have 10 times the densification of the run sites and hundreds of thousands of network functions. Each of them has its own version, so I need to handle multiple versions, and we need to mesh and integrate multi-supplier technologies into the mix, and then this even, of course, bring more complexity and driving up the time scale and the cost. And we need also to manage all this complexity and deliver the services with agility and speed and adapt and ensure and also the economic sustainability of all of that. So the complexity is high. We have a lot of challenges. It's possible, but we need to work together in order to ensure that we provide different solutions, different pieces that can work together to provide the overall solution.
You know, so two things. One is AI and ML solves everything. And for those of you who know me, you probably know that I actually started off my career in the lab working on some of the early neural networks many years ago when I had a lot more hair. And I actually walked away from that whole area for two reasons. One is I said, I can't wait around 30 years for there to be enough data and for there to be enough CPU power. And this is not going to work for a long time. And I didn't want to spend my days writing papers. But then I still see many claims made now, 30 years later or so, and I go, I don't think it's going to work. So that's a little too much euphoria still, hype around what you can really do with the INML, and we need to become a little more realistic. But neural networks are really great for some things, and we just need to make sure we don't oversell it.
We're going to have to figure out, we have to realize that neural nets are not the only form of AI.
And that's true too. They aren't. There's many, many other techniques involved around different types of learning, for sure. And the other thing is, I'm very interested in Marc's comment about security and explainability of the system, because, you know, I just remember back when I broke into telecom, there was an 800 database failure, and half of North America's 800 system was out for a number of hours. And I remember I talked to a colleague of mine from Bell Canada, and he said, you know, someone's head's going to roll there, you know. And so, you know, imagine we have an AI system running the network, and it takes out a router, right? And all of a sudden, Facebook's not reachable anymore. Someone's going to be able to have to explain that, right? And, you know, there has to be that thread of culpability, if I use the wrong word, but the best word I got.
How do you fire an AI?
That's right. And what's the legal responsibility around it, right?
There are a few movies about that, right? The Terminator, no.
You know,
Yeah, but the other problem is that we're talking about open multi-vendor environments. It's one thing when it's the incumbent vendor. It's another thing now that we're in a disaggregated network, where all of a sudden now we have more domains from a management point of view and more potential problems and more vendors that might be responsible, but we have to figure out how to sectionalize to even know where the
you know, we're actually
whose issue is it?
we're actually facing the same problem now in our ODSA project, which looks at chiplets. For those of you that are familiar with chiplets, where we assemble individual silicon wafers onto an integrated circuit, so it becomes one chip effectively, but there are multiple wafers, and the wafers can come from different vendors. So what happens when you have 5 chiplets you're assembling onto an integrated circuit? One is bad. What's the liability there? What do you do with that? So we're seeing the same thing in a much smaller scale.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say that it's not going to happen. I'm saying we need some new disciplines that we don't think around today. We need some new disciplines to be able to achieve this transition and migration to the cloud. We cannot think the same way we've been thinking and expect that all these problems are going to be solved. We're just going to have to come at it from a different perspective.
And I think this is a place where community organizations will have to help set the tone
But
for
this
where
is
we go.
A lot also because moving to the cloud is not only about technology. It's a new culture, it's a new mindset, it's a new processes across the delivery chain, right? And on the other hand, can I take just the telco, now we talk about telco applications, can I take just the telco applications and re-architect them using the cloud native principles or whatever and just put them on the cloud? It's not enough, again, as you said, to bring together the DUs and the RU and connect it to the CU. You need so much telco expertise here, right? And you need so much good synchronization here, and how you actually build a disaggregated system. This is something very, very complicated. It's not straightforward like to build an IT disaggregated network. And this is something that you really need, you need a way to go until this will be really materialized.
Maybe just a word on that, on the multi-vendor environment in the community. I think a good example is, you know, we're participating in the 5G Open Innovation Lab in North America. And that, you know, to an extent, it's like a startup incubator, right? So there's founding members, Amdocs and T-Mobile and Microsoft and I think Nokia as well, and NASA and Dell and VMware. So all of these, you know, big players. And then there's like 40 or 50 startups with new startups coming in every day. Some startups are functional, like that managing the private network, and others are the actual application. And it ties in, I think, to, you can't start, everybody's kind of looking to the end state of everything working together seamlessly, right? It's a journey, and, so we worked first on bringing a first use case at a farm around taking the data analytics over a private network, processing as much as you can at the edge to minimize what you have to upload to the public cloud, right, to save the time and the resources, and then the agriculture analytics get back to the farmer, the customer, in minutes, what used to take him days because it's terabytes of data because it comes from drone footage. And whenever, we talk about that, then people say, no, agriculture, it's not. And I say, no, it's not about that. It's not this one application. He has 50 applications, and it's not this one farm with this single edge, but it's thousands of farms all across the country. And I think that's where a major opportunity for the service providers to differentiate, as opposed to just, one enterprise having a private network. We know many times they don't think first thing of service providers. They might go to integrators or to hardware providers. But when you think of these scaled offerings with multiple applications and be able to leverage the economy of scale also across the edge, like we're speaking here, but my first point was working in this multi-vendor environment and the journey, right? Starting and with the proof points, there he's saving 50% on water. So, we have to remember, we're all talking here on the operational. We always need to keep the mind on the use cases at the end of the day.
Yeah, and also take it incrementally, right, to reduce the risk. So start with the areas that it's easier and then extend it with more and more disaggregation. And maybe one more aspect that is very critical, in my opinion, to think about, just think about Oren again. The idea is really that, or even applications that I develop, right? I want to be able to take my application and port it on every platform. I want it to be platform agnostic, right? This is a key. Also accelerator agnostic, that I can take my application and just plug and play. But is it possible today? Can I take my application, run it on Google Cloud, and then move it to Amazon or to Azure or something like this smoothly, seamlessly? This is not the case, right? I need to put a lot of tailoring in order to run it on a particular cloud environment. And this is also a challenge, because even if I want to abstract the platform and provide some information that I'll be able to do it, I need to make sure that I don't adversely impact the performance of the run functions by all of these additional abstraction layers that I provide. So a journey to take.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did promise you a little bit of controversy. And so I'm going to tell you about 5 years ago, when we were about 5 years into implementing the ETSI white paper and SDN and NFV, I'm sitting in New York having dinner with a colleague of mine from Bloomberg. And this was around the time when we sort of saw the end of the era of the telecom providers trying to go against the cloud providers. And I'm going to call it the CSP versus CSP battle, because in the world that I live in, CSP means cloud service provider, and in this world it does not. And I have to be very careful when I try to read any publications.
But we combine them together today, no, isn't it? We combine the communication and the cloud services today.
So the question actually was, gee, 5 years from now, do we think the cloud providers will be running a lot of the communication provider networks? And our perspective was most probably, because the culture of the cloud providers was something that you could not duplicate in a telecom provider. And we were also speculating if the communication providers were toast or they still had a role to play. And we actually thought that edge computing, which at that point people were just starting to talk about, was a chance for the communication service providers to get back in the game. Because one thing that the communication providers have is land, territory. You've got all the COs, you've got all that the cloud providers don't want to duplicate, right? Now the challenge is, do the communication providers get relegated to anything more than the very low level flat revenue services, or is there a way that they can partner in a better way? And I will tell you, we felt the jury was still out on that. So I'm going to turn it over to the panel, and I don't have an answer today. But I'm going to turn it over to the panel because I'd like to hear from the three of you. What do you think? Where are we headed with, Google and AWS and the other large cloud providers all setting their sights on helping run telecom networks.
Yeah. So definitely there is a lot that we can learn from the hyperscalers, right? The way, the agility that they are driving, the experience that they are providing, the analytics that they are using, the ecosystem. They bring such a great ecosystem beyond that none of the operators have, right? In order to create these wow applications, both to the consumers and the enterprises. So definitely we need to learn from them. We need to understand what is very, very specific to telco that we need to provide a different solution or take it in a different way or to adapt it. And I think the secret is about partnership that where everyone can win and together to create the value. And it's not any longer about a single solution, a single provider, single supplier. It's about co-creation of innovation. And the opportunity would come really for monetizing the network, where the operators have the opportunity to go from the pipe dump, that communication that they used to provide, and really provide more value to the enterprises. In my opinion, this is the big opportunity, and I think GSMA already a few years back when they talked about network slicing at that time, with the hype of network slicing, they were talking about a huge revenue stream coming for the enterprise, and this is the opportunity, working together with the hyperscalers, with their platforms probably, with some of the services, getting a connection into their ecosystem, bring the ecosystem into the story, and really innovate on top of that, opening the network, monetizing the network, moving to the as a service model, to the as a service delivery paradigm, where I actually move from using data to consuming, using connection, to using data, to using valuable data that can help me to optimize my behavior, to optimize my experience, to optimize the processes in the enterprise environment. This is the opportunity, and this is where they need to collaborate together and work together, taking the best from each environment, each sector, each culture that they all have, and bring together something that would be very useful to all.
I think that there's no doubt collaboration is key, and we're seeing it, right, in AT&T, Dish, Rakuten, where this becomes even more intense. And I very much connect to what you mentioned about the edge, right? I remember myself pitching, the edge, this is the opportunity, you have the cabinets, exactly what you said, and it didn't happen for various reasons, but I think we're seeing a similar kind of event now around private networks, right? So private networks was also something, and then AWS came with their own private network. Microsoft Azure came with their private network, now announcing it at MWC. But at the same time, I think the second thing they said, no, we're not competing with service providers. So everyone's, I think, aware it's a delicate balance. But if you have to bring it down to the bottom line, if we imagine the marketplace of the future, so will it be, will you be buying communication services in the Azure or AWS marketplace extending your connectivity, or will you be going to the service providers marketplace for the more detailed services, and the cloud services will be there? Probably, it depends. It will be different from region, and it will be a mix. If we connect to the subject of this conference, the service providers needs as much tools, as much capabilities to have automation and these capabilities and this and everything we talked about, and AI extending. So moving further along in this journey, to have a better positioning in this kind of equilibrium, because hyperscalers can jump in and do it. We're seeing it time and time again. So it's better to cooperate from a more informed and practical place.
And they will.
Can I just comment on one common aspect that you said? You said on the edge, you said it didn't happen. I would actually challenge that. It's true that it could happen earlier, but it started. So if you look what happens in Asia, for example, definitely edge computing is really accelerating there, and we will see it increasing now. I think it's about the timing. So it started, and we see the value of that. We see the value of that for different applications and different use, but I think it started, and we see the value already from that, and we will accelerate that. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I didn't say that the edge didn't happen. I said that the hyperscalers moved. I mean, the
Okay.
positioning of the service provider wasn't as strong
I see.
as,
Okay,
they didn't hold on to the edge as they potentially could, right?
Yeah.
Because they could have.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I didn't understand.
My thought on the original question, where or how do the hyperscalers fit into the telecommunication industry? I mean, I think back to some of the early decisions that the hyperscaler, or at the time, the public cloud providers, they weren't necessarily hyperscalers at that time, and their thought process. They looked at the telecommunications industry and said, this is really fascinating how we can get so much capacity. How do we leverage a tremendous amount of capacity and then be able to enable applications on that capacity? And over years time, we've seen a similar rise in the amount of compute and storage capacity that's available in the public cloud. But what we didn't see is necessarily the telecommunication operators, the service providers and related even integrators ask the same question, which is, oh, well, now we have this tremendous amount of compute and storage resource. How can we exploit this for a competitive advantage? And maybe it's time to do that. Maybe it's time, because the biggest stumbling block I see in the telecommunications domain versus the hyperscalers who are just completely trying to take over the world in some respects, but at the same time they are partnering. I mean, there isn't a day that goes by without a partnership agreement between a hyperscaler and a telecommunications service provider. But I think that we need to go is to think about how this co-opetition model can be exploited by the carriers, because right now it does, I mean, from an outside perspective, take investors, a good way to see, very reliable. I mean, they don't value telecommunications the way they value the cloud community. And then when you actually go the next level, which is I'm going to build applications on top of that, they value that even more. So those are the signs of where to go. But, we haven't, for a lot of reasons we've been talking about for 2 days, it's not happening yet. There's increment. Like we said, it's a journey. We're getting there, but we have to accelerate this journey. It's a different time scale now.
Cliff, if you just allow me one point.
Please.
Thank you. I just want to highlight that you mentioned a lot of cooperation that's happening today between service providers and the hyperscalers, and this is correct. But if you think about the model, the business model that they are working with, it's very much still over the top. Over the top. It's not a real integration. It's not a real working together, except for some very particular cases. And I think really moving to network monetization, really exposing the network, exposing the services. I don't want to talk about slices. Exposing the services, exposing the resources, etc. This is where they actually can work together and connect it and make value out of the network. And each of the players will really win off to this.
Well, I promised I wouldn't make this an ad for the Open Compute Project Foundation, but this is a good place for the telecom providers to come together with the hyperscalers and look at the defining of those APIs and how that can be made to work. But not belaboring that point, I'm going to open up the floor to questions in 4 minutes. So please get ready if you have any. I've got more questions in case you don't, but it's a good audience, so I'm not worried. The one last pre-prepared question I'd like to deal with a little bit is if you're in Meta, the metaverse, or if you're in NVIDIA, the omniverse, but in either case, where does that take us? Does it really change anything, or is it just all hype?
Well, I think the metaverse is like the latest of a long line of killer apps, right? Which every time remains to be seen. Putting aside the whole discussion if the metaverse is VR and it's indoors, so do you even need 5G? So there's different places and angles that it can go. To me, it ties back to what I mentioned before. We have to keep the use cases in mind that will drive these applications. And on that note, if we kind of, many times we compare what's happening to the network now to what the journey the public cloud went through, right? So from the static network to everything much more virtualized, containerized, dynamic. And the public cloud didn't start as it is today. And it started, right, the first instances, mentioning 2007, 2008, started with some basic storage. So things were very static, and people didn't talk about cloud gaming back then, even not as a vision. So I think we're a little bit of in the industry victims of our own, not our own, but of the general hype of 5G. Metaverse is now also coming in there, and it's good. If it's, we want new demanding applications and to be able to enable them, but again, not to be enable them just in here and that, in a very tight way, but how can we operate them like the cloud operates today, right? You go in, you order it, you pay for it in dynamic ways, new business models. And I think a great example for that, the Super Bowl that a few months ago. So there were every carrier in the States, they had these announcements, VR experience in the Super Bowl. It was great. None of them were monetized, right? They were all marketing. You could do some stuff off your phone. It's arguable if some of them could work on 4G or maybe even on Wi-Fi. So it's starting to explore that. Obviously, the vision is a full connected studio with 20 different applications and B2C and B2B. But yeah, so it's a journey to get there. So maybe it's a long answer, not exactly addressing the question. But I think Meta is starting to change. It's good to have these use cases appear, but it's also important to be a little bit realistic. But that's my view. I think others.
Well, I think it's just another step on the journey. I mean, we started with, what was a network? I mean, we provided whatever we provided way back when, and then it starts to go and migrate into audio. Audio was the big thing. If you remember in the day, iTunes was taking over everything. This is a totally overused example, Cliff, but we'll raise it as an example anyhow. And then we went to video, and now video is all, if you look at Ericsson's, if you look at their mobility survey, where's the traffic? It's all in video. And this is going to be the next thing someday. And it's not going to be the next thing because people are having fun at the Super Bowl. I think maybe that's going to be the case. It's going to be the next thing when telemedicine starts to incorporate this in, and we're going to see this whole new set of other vertically driven applications, to Ron's point, where there is that value proposition, there is that ROI, because otherwise, entertainment only gets you so far, but these vertical applications are going to be where it's at. Maybe it's V2X and autonomous. The smart city autonomous vehicle connection, not just autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, and perhaps some of the digital twin work that we're looking at doing.
Well, I think that's sort of the tools to help get there. But I think that these are applications. That's the point.
Yeah, and I was about to say, did some work with the oil and gas industry, right? And understanding what's going on in the field in the drilling rig and being able to, have an unskilled worker do maintenance, right, out in the field somewhere far away, things like that. Will be other use cases that I know are being looked at very seriously.
Yeah, I concur with what my colleagues here absolutely said, and I really think it's good to see metaverse because it gives real use cases that are going to materialize and use what we actually do, and NVIDIA provides all the support for the processing perspective, so this is really, really good. It's a journey. And I really concur with what you said, Ron, that we need to come from the use cases. We need to come top down. We need to understand. Sometimes we feel that, at least I feel personally, that there is some hypes with technologies. We have technologies, let's use it. Let's do some fun, put it everywhere. But we don't see the overall story. We don't see the need. We don't see the use case. And I really hope that in 6G, 5G really started with use cases, right?
Yeah.
But if you think about the use cases, we still have a journey together, and people already talk about 6G. In order to see 6G, we need to understand what will be available when 6G will come, what will be the gaps, what is the opportunity with the technology evolution, how the technology will evolve, what will be available with AI and ML already before 6G, and what are the gaps that we need to fill, what would be the challenges to make the AI more intuitive, something that we can really streamline everything. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm supposed to be opening up the floor to the audience now, so go ahead. Does anyone like to ask a question? Okay, I'm just going to go here because it was closer, and then I'll come over to you.
Thank you. So when I hear comments about the edge, I think of what's happened in terms of data centers anyway. So you had these big data centers, and then at some point, people started to look at metro areas and distributed data centers. And in a way, edge is like finer granularity of computing, going to all sorts of places. But here's the question. It's going to start off perhaps with obvious use cases. But is anyone thinking longer term in terms of, as this will evolve perhaps even more than these bigger data centers, but is anyone thinking in terms of sustainability, how to do this in an intelligent way, because at some stage, computing is going to be everywhere. And this comes to a point you make, 50% of applications will need accelerators. Well, these are huge beasts, and you're talking about right at the edge. So is anyone thinking about sustainability?
Yeah. So definitely. Already now we start thinking about, not only now, for a while, but now we accelerate the effort on sustainability. If you go now to ORAN, you go now to SC5, you see a lot of new work items on sustainability, how to improve the energy efficiency, how to use the AI to do better sustainability, how to use the cooling, how to do everything there. So it's a very, very big topic. And by the way, it's one of the key use cases for 6G. And in 6G, again, as I said, as we think about this already, and we try to come with solutions already now for the cloud environment, for the distributed cloud environment, I think it's very, very important to understand how this will evolve and what would be the gaps to solve in 6G, and not just to come now for 6G and talk about sustainability, because hopefully we will have many of the solutions available before another 10 years are coming.
And my thought on this is that when I think about what drives this kind of change that you're talking about, because this is fundamental change, I think there's two areas. One is innovation with the potential for great return. That always drives change. And the second one is maybe a little more subtle, but regulatory action drives massive change. And if governments around the world decide that all of a sudden sustainability really, and stop paying lip service to it and decide it's really there, that will happen. Now, there's pockets in various places around the world, certainly the EU and North America, not just the US, but North America and other APAC as well. But what it takes is the will, and we haven't seen the will to the point where it's driving the investments required to, it's more, we'll think about it, here's some ideas, more than we have to do this. That's unfortunately where, I'm sort of hesitant to bring it up, but we have to call it what it is, and that's where we are.
But I think a positive point is that everything, again, we've been talking about here, from automation, autonomous network, I think a lot of that could be applied also to that area of sustainability, getting other points of data. So maybe the points of data will be how much usage or not, or power consumption, and start to balance that with usage and not keeping everything on. And ORAN is a great example of the ability to power down or completely distribute the functions and power down sites that are very energy extensive. So again, I think it's important, the same framework, sometimes we talk about applying it to the application, sometimes to operational efficiency, and you could just as well apply these angles, and AI will solve everything, right? To handle the energy saving in a more efficient way.
But the concern I have longer term is that we're not talking about the compute capacity and the network capacity going down. We're talking about going exponentially higher to support some of these applications. And what does that mean? That's more heat, more thermal footprint, more space required. It is a serious problem that, thinking long term versus where we are today, that I don't know where I don't know what that force is that puts this on the political agenda.
So I would like to go back to autonomous network, if this is possible. And the question here would be essentially, when you talk about autonomous network, and many people around here during the days have done that also, you talk about visibility and observability. Those are human characteristics. And I wonder actually why you are not talking about decidability and concludability, because when I'm thinking about an autonomous network, I don't think that there is a dashboard or anything. Autonomous networks will decide on their own without us even noticing that decisions are being taken. And the question which I have is, because that happens in our company, because we are always talking about visibility, observability, and that kind of stuff, our management is asking, okay, where is the dashboard for the real-time decisions? Which people are sitting in front of that, and that kind of stuff? So have we not got it right, thinking about autonomous networks so far?
So I think at least it might be a terminology on my side. well, it's two parts. When mentioning about visibility, I was more focusing on the real-time effect, because even if these inputs are not, like you say, well, today still some of them go to dashboards, but like you mentioned, we want to get more autonomous and it handled by a machine, but it still has to come in real time and be monitored all the time. It's not like the, you know, depending on the speed of which these updates happen on the network level, on the resource level, and on the service level, it has to be much more real time and dynamic. Now, whether that goes to a dashboard or, like you say, I think more accurately, I will go to the algorithm or to the engine that operates it. For sure, that's the way we want to go. But for the journey of the data model has to happen.
Yeah. Want to talk?
Well, it's a really great question, but it is at the fundamental heart of the human perspective on automation, right? When are we willing to let go? And I think to answer that question, we need to add some new stakeholders into this discussion. And certainly I was suggesting before that, I didn't say it, but I'll say it now. I think we need the educational community in here so we can start to figure out some talent developments for this long-term shift into a world that we don't really understand very well. But in this case, this is about risk management, because you have to decide how much risk you're willing to take. So it's time to invite some next generation insurance companies to this kind of forum, and let them talk about how risk really works, because it gets down to dollars and cents or euros or whatever currency that you want to talk in, and we can then start to deal with technical solutions around these human problems, because this is not I don't view this as a technical problem. I think a lot of automation works very well, but then you get into the liability question and it changes the whole discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why we actually support the transition here, right? The transition to autonomous networks. So the transition of the autonomy to the network itself, and this is step by step and can be realized by different operators in different ways, right? So I just think about me giving the control to something else. It's impossible. Yeah, so we need somehow to understand what is happening, right? So we need means to help this transition. For example, to be able to support explainability. I take some actions. I made some analytics. I take some action. I want to explain what happened, why I took this decision, what were my considerations. So the machine needs to be able to explain the decision, to understand the circumstances that has driven this decision. And it may be even that in addition to the explainability, we need to allow the operator to consent for the time being, to consent the operation before it is being taken, until it gets the trust in these automation processes. And then I believe that more and more good decisions will be taken, and they will see the value out of this. The level of the need to supervise and to give the consent will decrease, and we will move into real autonomous network. But this is a journey. It's a journey. It's, in my opinion, a few years journey, if not 10 years journey.
And the fact is, do we accept that software will sometimes fail, and there will be self-driving cars? There'll be self-driving cars that have accidents just like humans do. Hopefully they do better. For me, I'm still driving my own car for a while.
Well, actually, autonomous vehicles, perfect example. They do better, but there's this 1 in a million accident that everybody wants to fixate on, which is at the legislative level. Because I live in California, where we see these things running around for years, and it's just a legislative problem.
I mean, on the other hand,
it's a real world, and I mean, back to your point about software, though, the answer is obviously, yeah, there is no software that doesn't have problems. That's why we need a software development lifecycle. There is no perfect software. Even autonomous software generation, which is going to happen, it is happening in some circles. I mean, we have to have some process for dealing with defects.
Well, I mean, look at the aviation industry, right? The autopilots on planes have been able to land planes for a long time.
Yeah.
In fact, I would bet in some cases, probably more accurately than a human pilot could in some cases, but they're still not landing the planes. They're still forced to have humans doing it. There's room for one more question if someone has one.
Yeah, it was quite informative in the the points that you mentioned about edge compute and where edge compute would sit. and also the challenges of edge compute and the use cases, which one of the use cases which you mentioned about, would be video analysis, where you could do close to the edge and then take the processing onto the cloud. And also the security challenges. So my question basically is, from the service provider's point of view, and imagine service providers, which you mentioned, having their own presence of POPs or data centers. How do you productize this, as a product? I mean, it's a common. I mean, it's a question to see, because where do you stand here in terms of, the hyperscalers have done this. It's not something new, but when it comes back to the service providers, the kind of expertise that you need and productize it, and in the sense of you could productize it by going into the applications, or do you just provide the compute there and ask them to process it, and so basically what I'm trying to understand is, just from generic perspective, yes, it's nice to talk about it, but how, from a service provider's point of view, could that be a product, in terms of looking in?
Just a warning, we only have about a minute left, so any answer has to be short.
Because we didn't speak, we are not a panel.
Take it.
I just, the short answer is it depends. I mean, unfortunately, but even if you look at, like private networks with the edge embedded, which is even more productized, Vodafone Germany and DT, they had like campus network offerings a few years ago, and they're with some applications. So that's an approach of a more holistic solution. And in other cases, it might be just more of a private network. So I guess it depends on.
It depends.
On where you are, on the partners, on the industries, right? Different countries will be different.
The trick part here is to actually, you have pieces of digital capabilities, and the operators will mix and match and build their products and build their a solution. And we actually provide the means, we actually provide the pieces, and they need actually to mix and match that and provide the product itself. There is no one size fits all.
But they need to adapt and try and fail fast, which is, we haven't said, but explore with one approach, and if it doesn't work, so if you try with some application, it doesn't work I think that's an important thing, which the industry that isn't traditionally very well in throwing stuff and seeing if they work or not.
But it's
But we're
easier
improving.
now.
We're going.
But it's easier now because we don't have physical products, right? We have applications.
I'd like to thank the panel.